Hello, and welcome to my ThD Dissertation Presentation, part of the Doctor of Theology degree program at Forge Theological Seminary. My name is Stephen Beach, and I have been pursuing research in Christian philosophy and persecution, focusing more specifically on future persecution against Christians in America. Let's start off by going over some details about the program. Most specifically, the dissertation that I wrote is titled In Preparation of Apostasia, Persecution Against American Christians within an Enochian Worldview as Informed by a Philosophy of Death. My faculty advisor was Dr. Christian Watkins. I started the program officially December 14th, 2020. And I had several encounters or updates with my advisor as laid out in the e-portfolio that you can find online. And finally, I submitted my dissertation officially on the 28th of May, 2021. There is also a note on the website main page concerning institutional accreditation. If you want to read through that, you can. It talks about specific reasons as to why I chose a non-accredited seminary over an accredited seminary, such as Liberty University or other seminaries that are accredited through the accredited agencies in the U.S. So let's talk a little bit about myself. Let me go over some of that background information. First, I reside in the Pacific Northwest in a small coastal town and work part-time in the medical field. I am a bit of a recluse and spend most of my free time hiking or kayaking or rowing. And I also spend a lot of my free time studying the Bible and delving into Christian philosophy, most specifically into biblical anthropology, personal eschatology, and Christian metaphysics. Back in 2009, I graduated from Thomas Edison State College with a bachelor's degree in history. I then went on to finish a Master's of Theological Studies at Nations University. It was part of my work that I did while in my master's program, as well as in my own personal research, that led me to seek out a doctorate program. And thanks be to God, I was able to find Forge Theological Seminary, which has allowed me to accomplish a long-held personal goal of finishing my doctorate degree. There were several questions that I had as I was finishing my master's degree that worked great together, to form the premise for my doctorate research. Part of that is number one, existential questions about death and the afterlife, about consciousness and the fundamental nature of reality. The second question that I had was, I'd also done some extensive work on the subject of the Enochian Worldview or the Divine Council. If anyone has read anything by Dr. Heiser, you know what I'm talking about, or watched any of his videos, or listened to his Naked Bible podcast, you know what I'm referring to there. Lastly, third, but it was the 2020 presidential election that really brought into focus the topic of my dissertation, which is persecution in America, or how should we should prepare for what appears to be religious persecution on the horizon. So let's go through some of the specific items of this program that I went through, and concerning the ThD program specifically. There were a few requirements of the program at FTS that were official, but I also added courses as I was preparing for the program. This was one of the main reasons that I chose FTS over other seminaries like Liberty, as this program was more flexible and allowed me to incorporate other elements into the program as I saw fit. So the first several weeks of the program, I spent working and writing various articles, reading preliminary books, as well as establishing the online e-portfolio as well, which you see on your screen. For the degree program, I finished a concept paper on the program. I also worked on the proposal and sent that proposal in along with the presentation. And I also added to the program, which was not officially required, but I added 3 journal articles that were to be written and submitted for publication. One of those articles have thus been completed and sent in for publication to the seminary's online journal. So, and I still wait to hear back on whether or not that will be approved to be published. So as I worked through the proposal, my aim was to show adequate background and data in support of the research question. Does Christian persecution exist in the United States today? And if not, should American Christians be preparing for persecution in the future? What I found was not only has persecution against Christians worldwide increased over the last 20 or 30 years, but given the hostility shown in both cultural and political spheres today in the U.S., and especially during and after the close of the 2020 presidential election, it stands to reason that Americans should readopt some kind of theology of persecution in preparation for the future. Some elements stood out for me in the research that I was initially unaware of before I started the program. The first thing that I came to find out was, as an American, I did not realize that the brand of Christianity that I've experienced over the last 30 years, most specifically evangelical Protestantism, is quite unique and does not actually occur anywhere else in the world. The second thing I realized was that the already occurring de-Christianization of American culture will be much more severe and have many more repercussions than I had first realized. The third, none of what was occurring today actually in American politics or in the culture is new at all. It's happened previously in places like former Yugoslavia, in China, in the Soviet Union, and in many other places around the world. It just happens to be happening now in the U.S. And lastly, I realized that a theology of persecution has much less to do with fighting back or political opinions or any of those kind of things that we normally think of, especially in the United States, and has much more to do with providing a testimony of one's faith in Christ, often in the face of direct physical and sometimes brutal opposition. To be effective, any persecution training will need to be predominantly psychological in nature and will require the individual to develop a solid biblical literacy and a deep-seated heartfelt prayer life, which also will reorder the priorities in both the person's personal and professional life. So let me go over to the dissertation itself real quick. So at this point, let me do a quick review of the dissertation itself without getting bogged down into too much detail, really. So on the dissertation, let me get over to the right spot here. So chapter 1, it covered the basics and set up the research project itself, including fleshing out the initial questions that needed to be answered that we just went through some of those. And chapter 2 and chapter 3 as well looked at the background and issues driving the cultural changes in America, providing an in-depth analysis of intersectionality, critical race theory, and woke ideology, which in reality simply boils down to American society possibly reaching the critical mass needed to sway the culture itself towards socialism, which possibly the American culture has finally reached the tipping point with these new generations. And it's very possible that now America will begin to slide and move into the descent into socialism proper. As it's previously in the past, in my generation, socialism was talked about and socialism was feared, but it's very possible that now we're seeing a tipping point and socialism actually is taking over large segments of society. So chapter 4 focused on the historical account of persecution. and uh, and provided several case studies from countries that illustrate what religious persecution really looks like and why it occurs and what are some of the responses that Christians have had over the last 2,000 years of instances of persecution. So, chapter 5, once we get to chapter 5, we see that this chapter built on the first 4 chapters and provided a loose blueprint for developing an effective theology of persecution for Christians in America. It defines both suffering and persecution. It explores the necessary requirements and foundations, discusses why or discusses what American Christians could expect in the future when it pertains to persecution, and ultimately what the responsibilities will be for every Christian when subjected to such hostile conditions. And once we get into chapter 6, this chapter provides a detailed examination of a philosophy of death, covering a basic introduction to death itself, as well as a biblical anthropology that defines the living being, the trichotomic composition that makes up the human being, and the personal eschatology relating to the processes of death and what ultimately becomes of the individual after death. And lastly, in chapter 7, we reach the conclusion of the research project, discuss the main findings of what was discovered and the potential research needs in the future on the subject matter itself. This chapter also provides an assessment and summary of the work overall. So let's talk a little bit about, let me get back up here, and let's talk a little bit about the process undertaken and the tools used to complete the project itself. So during the project, both linear reading and advanced data mining were used. Resources were collected in digital form. I really did not use any printed material. These documents were sorted and categorized as needed. All resources were tagged for reading. All those resources that were tagged for actual reading were read and notes were taken. All resources were then inputted into the Logos Bible software program, and advanced searches were run based on keyword searches. The keywords were developed from the dissertation outline that was first created in the proposal and then expanded upon when transferred over to the actual dissertation itself. So the writing actually occurred during April and May of 2021. With the final editing, compiling, and exporting done in the last few weeks of May. So some of the tools that were used during the research project include Scrivener's, the Scrivener word processing program. Also, as already mentioned, the Logos Bible software program was used. In addition to that, the Word Bible software program was used, and also extensively used was the Balboca text-to-speech software program that allowed me to for the books that were tagged to be read completely, those texts were imported into the text-to-speech program and allowed me to read the text at a much quicker pace. And as far as citation goes, the only citation program used was the Bibbit Now browser extension, which allows me to look up any source in Amazon or anywhere online, and it generates a Turabian citation. So that helped speed everything up a great deal. There were also various Office programs and whatnot used as well. At the time of this presentation, the dissertation will be submitted on May 28th of 2021, with all the documents and artifacts being uploaded to the project's ePortfolio at that time. Now, a dissertation defense is anticipated once the document has been read by the committee, and will hopefully provide an opportunity to discuss the research at more length at that time. And there will be a dissertation defense presentation as well, created and uploaded, posted to the ePortfolio as well. So let's go ahead and go back to the website, the ePortfolio website. So after I completed the initial stages, I did several preparatory preliminary assignments or activities that were self-assigned. And let's just review some of these real quickly before I close here. These are in no particular order. They are just posted on here. I did several updates on my progress that you can read on the website. And I did several book reviews. Here's one review that I did on a book that I read called The Unwritten Rules of the PhD Research. And I also wrote an article on writing style selections on using Turabian specifically, but also more generally about the citation process that is used in research today in academia. I also wrote an article specifically dealing with isolation in grad school, most specifically pertaining to students who are doing grad school online. And I wrote a book review on dissertation or destination dissertation, which is of course, a book about writing a dissertation and the writing process. I also did an overview of my ThD program and the research processes. There's an article there you can read about my specifics that delves a great deal, provides much more detail about the process itself. I also read a book and wrote a review on it titled Avoiding Thesis and Dissertation Pitfalls. And then also I watched a seminar online and wrote a review on it called Turning Your Dissertation into a Book. I also reviewed several dissertations and wrote a combined review on those dissertations. Many of those dissertations were later used in the research process itself, often being cited. I also wrote an article about the issues with latency in graduate programs. Most specifically, just as an example, a normal PhD program or ThD program, doctorate program of some kind, usually takes either 2 to 4 years or often sometimes 7 to 10 years, depending on the program that you're in and what the research topic is. I'm not sure exactly what the average time is for a seminary program. I can say that I was also looking at a PhD program at Liberty when I was first looking at graduate programs after I finished my master's degree. And that program, if I squeeze as much as I could out of it and expedite it as much as possible, that program would take a little less than 2 years. But much of that requirement was wait time, was waiting for the semesters to be over, was waiting for responses back from the advisors or the committees and whatnot. And I've also heard from other PhD program candidates, and they say a large part of the PhD program is waiting to hear back, is the waiting process, which I personally find kind of frustrating. This was one of the main reasons why I chose, in the end, Forge Theological Seminary's program, because it was not only a dissertation only program, which cut through a lot of the red tape and a lot of the superfluous requirements, the hoop jumping, if you will, but it also allowed me to finish on the pace that I wanted to. So if I wanted to take just a few months to do it, or if I wanted to take a few years to do it, much of the research I had already done. So that took care of being able to expedite the program. So I was really glad that I was able to find FTS, because it allowed me to pursue the degree at a much quicker rate than I would have at such a places like Liberty or elsewhere. So let's go ahead and go back to here at the website, and let's talk a little bit about now, as I come away from the program, I come away with a renewed sense of purpose and urgency to draw closer to God and to His Word, and realizing how fragile and how fragile our safety and security is in this world. As an American, I have been blessed to grow up and to live in a country where my individual freedoms and rights were mostly protected, where my choice of religion remained unmolested by a tyrannical government. After this project, and based on what I see and hear around me now, I now realize that this is no longer true. And if the cultural shift continues in the direction in which it is currently heading, things are only going to get worse in America going forward. I quote the closing of my dissertation as I close out this presentation. Um, as I stated, quote, now begins the work and the struggle for the faith, for the word of God, for American Christians to stand as a testimony in a darkened world, to be the light on the hill, and if called to be perfected in the flames of persecution and martyrdom, yet still. It is up to us to, as Paul championed 2,000 years ago, redeem the time, walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, for the days they are evil. And that is quoted from Ephesians 5:15 and 16. So I just want to thank you for watching this presentation. And please, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate but to email me or give me a call if you have my number. And or you can go onto the ePortfolio website, which you see on your screen now. And let me give you the website address there. And you can find all of the documents on the website. You can find all of you can find the dissertation itself, the proposal, and also the concept paper, as well as all the articles that I did to fulfill the requirements for this dissertation. Again, I want to thank you for watching. And my name is Stephen Beach, and this presentation is being submitted as partial fulfillment for the Doctor of Theology in Christian Philosophy and Persecution at Forge Theological Seminary. May God bless you and the rest of your day. Thank you.